Story 1: The Scarecrow House. It was a cold Halloween night when a group of friends decided to do something different. Instead of the usual parties and trick-or-treating, Lucas, Rachel, Mark, and Bianca chose to explore the old abandoned farm on the outskirts of town. The farm, known as the Scarecrow House, was surrounded by dark stories and urban legend. They said the place was haunted, and the scarecrows scattered across the property seemed to have a life of their own. "Come on, it'll be fun," insisted Lucas, always the most adventurous of the group. "Yeah, we need to prove all those stories are just that, stories," agreed Mark. Rachel and Bianca, though reluctant, agreed to go. But with flashlights and a good dose of courage, they set off towards the farm. The walk along the dark, winding trail was accompanied by the sound of wind in the trees and the rustling of dry leaves underfoot. As they reached the entrance of the farm, the full moon illuminated the landscape, revealing a series of scarecrows scattered across the fields. Each one looked more sinister than the last. Tattered clothes, old hats, and button eyes that seemed to follow them. "This is really creepy," whispered Bianca, gripping her flashlight tightly. "Don't worry, they're just dolls," replied Rachel, trying to sound confident. They advanced along the dirt path leading to the main house, a decrepit structure covered in ivy. The door was ajar, creaking slightly in the wind. They entered the house, the wooden floors creaking under their feet, and began exploring the dark, dusty rooms. "Let's split up to cover more ground," suggested Lucas. "Rachel and I will go upstairs. Mark and Bianca, you stay down here." The group agreed and divided. As Rachel and Lucas climbed the stairs, Mark and Bianca explored the kitchen and living room. Everything seemed to have been left in a hurry, with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs in every corner. Suddenly, a noise came from outside. Mark and Bianca ran to the window and saw one of the scarecrows outside, fallen on the ground. "I'm sure it was standing when we arrived," said Bianca, feeling a chill. "Must be the strong winds," replied Mark, though his voice betrayed a bit of uncertainty. Meanwhile, upstairs, Rachel and Lucas found a room full of old photographs and newspaper clippings. The photos showed the farm in its glory days, the smiling family, but one photo caught Rachel's attention. Scarecrow positioned exactly like the ones outside, only newer. "Look at this, Lucas," said Rachel, showing the photo. "Could the scarecrows be the same since that time?" Lucas looked at the photo, intrigued. "Maybe. But what matters is that we found something interesting to tell." Suddenly, they heard a scream from downstairs. They ran back down the stairs and found Mark and Bianca at the entrance, pale and scared. "One of the scarecrows, it moved," stammered Bianca. "What do you mean, it moved?" asked Lucas, incredulous. "It was on the ground and then it just stood up and returned to its original position," explained Mark, still trying to process what he had seen. The group decided to leave the house and investigate the scarecrows more closely. As they approached, a cold wind blew, making the scarecrows sway ominously. Lucas, trying to show courage, approached the scarecrow that Mark and Bianca had mentioned. As he got closer, he noticed something strange. The scarecrow's button eyes looked incredibly real, almost human. Before he could investigate further, the scarecrow moved, raising its straw hand to Lucas's face, who backed away in fright. "Let's get out of here," shouted Rachel, pulling Lucas by the arm. Friends ran back to the house, but upon entering, they realized something was wrong. The doors slammed shut, and the scarecrows outside began to surround the house. Panic set in, and the group tried to find an exit. "We need to calm down and think," said Mark, trying to stay composed. "Let's split up and look for another way out." As Rachel and Lucas tried to open the living room windows, Mark and Bianca went to the kitchen. Suddenly, they heard a noise in the basement. Mark decided to investigate while Bianca stood guard. In the basement, Mark found a series of old objects and more photographs, this time showing strange rituals. One of the photos showed a man with an old book and scarecrows in the background, as if they were part of the ritual. Before he could understand what he was seeing, felt a presence behind him. He turned and saw a scarecrow standing on the stairs. He tried to run, but the scarecrow advanced quickly, blocking his exit. Mark shouted for help, but his voice echoed uselessly through the basement. Meanwhile, Bianca heard the scream and ran to help Mark, but found the basement empty except for scarecrows that seemed to be moving in the shadows. Rachel and Lucas, still trying to open the windows, heard the screams and ran to find their friend. When they reached the basement, they found only Bianca, trembling and pointing at the scarecrows. "Mark, he disappeared," cried. The group, now reduced, decided they needed to leave the farm at any cost. They ran up the stairs, but found all the scarecrows at the entrance of the house, blocking their exit. "We have to find another way," said Lucas, desperate. Remembering the photographs from the basement, Rachel had an idea. "We need to find that old book. Maybe it has a way to end this." They returned to the basement and began frantically searching among the old objects. Finally, Rachel found the book. She began to flip through the pages, which were filled with disturbing texts and drawings. "There's a ritual here. I think we need to burn them," said Rachel, voice trembling. "How are we going to do that?" asked Bianca, looking at the scarecrows that were now moving towards them. "We need to lure them all to the barn and set it on fire," suggested Lucas. The group ran back upstairs and used flashlights to attract the scarecrows, leading them to the barn. Once there, they poured oil on the ground and walls, and Lucas lit a match, throwing it into the oil. The barn quickly caught fire, and the scarecrows tried to escape. The group blocked the exit, pieces of wood and other objects. They stood outside, watching as the barn burned, and the scarecrows were destroyed. They felt a mix of relief and sadness for the loss of Mark, but knew they had no choice. When the flames died down, the group returned to town, telling their story to the authorities. The farm was investigated, but no evidence of the scarecrows or the ritual was found. Rachel, Lucas, and Bianca moved on with their lives but never forgot that night. The experience marked them deeply, and they avoided abandoned places and dark stories from then on. Story 2. Cursed Mask. It was a small town where Halloween was the most anticipated celebration of the year. Streets were adorned with spooky decorations, and everyone prepared for the famous Masquerade Ball, traditional event that gathered people of all ages. Laura, a young woman with an adventurous spirit and a love for Halloween festivities, was eager to attend the ball. She wanted a unique costume, something that would make her stand out in the crowd. While wandering through the town, she found a small antique shop she had never noticed before. She decided to enter and look for something special. The shop was dark and filled with old objects, brimming with history and mystery. Laura browsed the dusty shelves when something caught her eye. An antique mask, meticulously carved and decorated with gold details and precious stones. It was beautiful and exuded an aura of antiquity. "This mask looks perfect," Laura thought, carefully picking it up. She felt a slight shiver upon touching the object, but ignored the feeling. The shop owner, an elderly man with piercing eyes, approached silently. "I see you found something of interest," he said with an enigmatic smile. "Yes, this mask is incredible. How much does it cost?" Laura asked. The man hesitated for a moment. "This mask is very old and has a peculiar history. They say it belonged to a countess many years ago, and she never took it off. But if you really want it, I can sell it to you for a reasonable price." Laura, enchanted by the mask and the story, decided to buy it. She paid the man and left the shop, eager to wear her new accessory to the ball. On the night of the ball, Laura dressed in an elegant black outfit and put on the mask. As she looked in the mirror, she was surprised by the transformation. The mask seemed to fit her face perfectly, enhancing her beauty in an almost supernatural way. Satisfied, she smiled and headed to the party. The ballroom was filled with masked people, dancing and enjoying themselves. Laura quickly became the center of attention, everyone admiring her exotic mask. However, as the night wore on, she began to feel strange. A sense of discomfort grew in her chest, and disturbing visions started to haunt her. While dancing, Laura had a vision of a woman dressed in period clothing, wearing the same mask. The woman looked desperate, trying unsuccessfully to remove the mask. Laura shook her head, trying to dispel the vision, but the feeling of discomfort only increased. "I need some air," she thought, leaving the ballroom and heading to an adjacent garden. There, she found a bench and sat down, trying to catch her breath. Suddenly, she felt the mask tightening on her face. She tried to remove it, but it seemed stuck. "What's happening?" she thought, panicking. Remembering the story the shop owner had told, she decided to return to the antique shop and confront the man. She arrived at the shop, knocking urgently on the door. The elderly man opened, looking at her with a somber expression. "I warned you the mask had a peculiar history," he said. "I can't take it off." Laura cried, desperate. The man sighed. "Come in, let me see what I can do." Inside the shop, the man explained the true story of the mask. The mask belonged to a countess accused of witchcraft. She used the mask to hide her identity. The curse cast upon her condemned her to never remove it. Since then, the mask seeks new victims, feeding on their souls. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. "So I'm cursed? Maybe there's still a chance," said the man. "There's a ritual that can free you, but it's dangerous." "I'll do anything," replied Laura, determined to get rid of the mask. The man began preparing the ritual, lighting candles and drawing ancient symbols on the floor. Laura sat in the center of the circle, heart pounding. The man started reciting words in an unknown language, and Laura felt the mask tightening even more. Suddenly, an invisible force seemed to pull the mask off, but at the same time, Laura felt as if her own life was being drained. She screamed in pain, remained firm. Finally, with one last tug, the mask came off and fell to the floor with a dull thud. Laura fell backward, gasping and sweaty, but felt immense relief upon realizing the mask was no longer on her face. The man helped her up and led her to a chair. "You did it," he said, looking relieved. "But we need to destroy this mask once and for all." He took the mask and placed it in an old chest, locking it with several chains and padlocks. "This chest will be sealed and buried in a place where no one will ever find it." Laura, still recovering, thanked the man with tears in her eyes. "Thank you. You saved my life." "It was my pleasure to help," he replied. "But remember, Laura, be careful with ancient and unknown objects. We never know what dark secrets may be hidden within them." Laura left the shop, feeling exhausted but relieved. She returned to the ball to let her friends know she was okay, but decided she needed to go home and rest. As she walked back, she reflected on what had happened and promised herself to be more cautious in the future. In the following days, Laura slowly recovered from the trauma. The experience made her stronger and more aware of the dangers hidden in seemingly harmless objects. She decided to share her story with friends and family, warning them about the dangers of meddling with ancient and unknown objects. The small town continued to celebrate Halloween with the traditional masquerade ball. But now there was a new urban legend about the cursed mask Laura had found. The antique shop, however, mysteriously disappeared, as if it had never existed. Laura never saw the man who helped her again, but always felt a deep gratitude toward him. She knew that thanks to him, she had survived a terrifying experience and learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of the unknown. Story 3. The Circus of Shadows. It was a dark Halloween night when the Circus of Shadows arrived in the small town of Brooksville. Traveling circus, famous for its mysterious performances and eccentric artists, had set up its colorful tents in the open field on the outskirts of town. The bright lights and music attracted everyone's attention, especially Thomas and Julia, two curious and adventurous siblings. "Come on, Julia. We have to see this up close," said Thomas, pulling his sister by the arm. "I heard this circus is different from all the others. They have acts you won't believe," replied Julia, excited. The siblings bought tickets and entered the circus, amazed by the magical and slightly sinister atmosphere. The main tent was full of people, and the air was electric with anticipation for the show. The circus artists began to perform, each act more incredible and strange than the last. There were gravity-defying acrobats, magicians performing impossible tricks, and exotic creatures that seemed to come from a nightmare. Thomas and Julia were enchanted, but they couldn't help but notice something unsettling about each of the performers. "Did you notice how the artist's eyes look empty?" whispered Julia to Thomas. "Yeah, it's weird, but it might be part of the show," replied Thomas, trying not to be frightened. During an intermission, the siblings decided to explore the smaller tents around the main one. They entered a tent showcasing a puppet show. The puppets were incredibly realistic, and their movements were almost human. As the show progressed, Thomas and Julia realized something unsettling. Puppets seemed to have a life of their own. "This doesn't feel right, Thomas," said Julia, grabbing her brother's arm. "Let's get out of here," agreed Thomas, feeling a chill down his spine. As they left the tent, they encountered one of the circus performers, Clown with a sinister smile. "Are you enjoying the show?" he asked in a low, drawn-out voice. "Yes, it's very interesting," replied Thomas, trying not to seem scared. "Good, we have a special act tonight. You won't want to miss it," said the clown, laughing in a way that made the siblings shiver. They returned to the main tent, where the final act was about to begin. The ringmaster, a tall man in a black cloak with piercing eyes, announced the last act, the Dance of Shadows. The lights went out and a dense fog covered the stage. When the lights came back on, a figure began to dance, moving in a hypnotic and disturbing way. As the dance continued, Thomas and Julia realized the figure was not human but a living shadow, moving independently and seemingly conscious. "This isn't possible," whispered Julia, her eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, the shadow began to approach the audience, and people started screaming and trying to flee. Thomas and Julia ran toward the exit but found the doors locked. The shadow seemed to follow their every move, as if hunting them. Desperate, the siblings looked for a place to hide. They found an empty tent and hid behind some trunks. As they caught their breath, they heard whispering voices around them. "You cannot escape," said a soft but menacing voice. The circus of shadows always takes its toll. Thomas and Julia realized they were surrounded by the circus performers, who now revealed their true forms, beings of darkness, trapped between the world of the living and the dead. "What do you want from us?" shouted Thomas, trying to protect his sister. "We want your souls," replied the ringmaster, emerging from the shadows. "You dared to enter our domain, and now you must pay the price." The siblings knew they had to find a way to escape. Remembering the stories they'd heard about the power of light, Thomas had an idea. He took a lighter from his pocket and lit it, pointing the flame toward the shadows. To his surprise, the shadows recoiled, hissing in pain. "The light! Use the light!" shouted Julia, grabbing a flashlight from one of the trunks. The flashlight on, they began to drive the shadows back, clearing a path toward the exit. The circus performers tried to block their escape. The light kept them at bay. Finally, they found a window and managed to escape, running toward the town. At dawn, they found themselves at the entrance to the field where the circus had been set up. But to their surprise, the circus had disappeared, leaving only an empty and silent field. There was no sign of the tents or the performers, as if they had never been there. Thomas and Julia returned home, still in shock from what they had experienced. They told their parents, who initially found it hard to believe, but realized something terrible had happened. The experience left a deep mark on the siblings, who avoided any kind of circus or similar spectacle from then on. Brooksville never saw the Circus of Shadows again, but the legend of that night spread, becoming a warning story for everyone in the town. And so, the third story of Halloween horror stories comes to an end. Each tale reveals the depths of the unknown and the courage of those who face their fears. These stories are a reminder that true terror often lurks in the most unexpected places, waiting to be discovered. May we always remember the lessons learned and continue to fight for the safety and peace of those we love.